Okay, so today we're very fortunate to have Ayelet Waldman here with us to speak. Ayelet is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Bad Mother, a chronicle of maternal crimes, minor calamities, and occasional moments of grace. Love and Other Impossible Pursuits, Daughter's Keeper, and The Mommy Track Mysteries. Her personal essays have been published in a wide variety of newspapers, magazines, including the New York Times, The Guardian, the San Francisco Chronicle, Elle Magazine, Vogue, Allure, Cookie, Child, Parenting, Real Simple, Health, and Salon.com. Her radio commentaries have appeared on All Things Considered and The California Report. The film version of Love and Other Impossible Pursuits, with Don Ross as screenwriter and director, and Natalie Portman in the lead role, is set to premiere at the Toronto Film Festival in September 2009. Her books are published throughout the world in countries such as England and Thailand, the Netherlands and China, Russia and Israel. So, without further ado, Ayelet.
You gotta tell me what's up with the guy eating his lunch over there. That's just, we're all gonna pretend we're not noticing.
This is a BC room because you wanted to see it in another
I get it. Hi. Hi, actually. So thank you so much, Isma, for inviting me. I've always wanted to eat in your cafeteria ever since I saw that Google chef wipe out so dramatically on Top Chef. Did you guys see that? She seemed really nice. Her food seemed a little iffy, but I was inspired. And I actually, when I tweeted that I was coming down to talk here today, I don't know how many people immediately said, "Are you going to go eat in the cafeteria?" And this is probably not news to you, but there are a number of employees of Google who take a photograph of their lunch every day and upload it to a Flickr stream. Yeah, it was good lunch. I don't quite know what that says about how much time y'all have on your hands. But, all right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my last book, which is called Bad Mother. And in particular, one area of it that I never get to talk about this because I never know whether anybody in my audience will really get what I'm talking about. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I assume y'all are going to understand what my reference is. So when I first got pregnant with my son Zeke, who's my second kid, who's 13 years old now, the first thing I did, absolutely first thing I did, even before I verified that I was pregnant, was I joined an online support group for mothers due in the month of June 1997. Okay, so that was like totally dark ages, right? Way back in 1997. There were no Yahoo groups. There were no Google groups. Nobody had even heard of you guys. Those were the days when we were using things like Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves, no less, for navigation through the ether. I don't know how many of you live in the East Bay, but there was an Ask Jeeves billboard up for just forever, long after it became this sort of poignant reminder of the early days of the internet. But that's when I joined this first email group. There wasn't even a web yet. People who knew what the web was were starting to talk about it, but to everybody else, we just called it the internet. And there certainly were not 500 million blogs with information about, the genesis of toenail fungus, whether Matt Smith can really step into David Tennant's shoes. Anybody? Thank you. No, I know, it's a heartbreak. Those were more innocent times. Before the proliferation of mommy blogs and online parenting magazines, Annie Lamott was still over at Mothers Who Think It's Salon. Do any of you remember those long ago days when she was blogging about her baby Sam? And it was before she'd even published any of those books that made her such a superstar. And just to give you an idea how long ago that was, Sam, the baby she was writing articles about, because they were not blog posts then, just had his own kid. Okay, so that's how long ago we're talking about. Now, I had a group of friends at the time who were using email regularly. And this was not, sure, all of you probably were, but this was not really common. They didn't use it as much as I did, maybe because they had yet to quit their time-consuming and intellectually satisfying jobs for the more mundane pleasures of killing time while the baby naps. But there were 13 of us. Some of us knew each other from Wesleyan University. Some had gone to school at Columbia Journalism School. It was this little, I had my June bug list, and I had this little internet group of women who most of you know, friends of friends. And I don't know if I should tell you the name of what we called ourselves, but suffice it to say that this was a time when cyber still had kind of a cachet about it, and the literary genre of chick lit had not taken over the front tables of bookstores. So if you put those two together, you can see what horrible name we came up for our little group. My online buddies and I were very regular emailers. Sometimes each of them shot off as many as, wait for it, 10 to 20 emails per day. But if you're a fast reader and you suffer from graphomania, as I do, then 13 correspondence just is not enough, no matter how prolific they are. And I could email with those women, but we could talk about things like whether, I don't know what my baby had done to turn her shit that exact shade of Easter egg blue. I know, right? I don't know. Still, to this day, it happened periodically. No one has ever understood the genesis of it. But what I wanted was companionship from women who are going through exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment. I wanted to be around a bunch of mothers whose babies were going to be born in the same month. So I joined Towards, like I said, before I had even gotten confirmation that I was pregnant. And this was this listserv, expected mothers due in June. There were about 50 women at the time that I joined. Over the course of that first trimester, it fluctuated in size, increasing as more people discovered they were pregnant or discovered the listserv, ebbing at the 8-week mark, which you all probably know why, as some people found out they weren't pregnant anymore. That first ultrasound. There were people from all over the English-speaking world. Most of us were American. They were obviously women of all economic classes, single mothers on welfare, wives of investment bankers, waitresses, pediatric neurosurgeons. Those are just some of the few that I remember. There was almost no racial diversity. With a few exceptions, all the women were white. But in other ways, it was a pretty diverse group of people, right? There was pretty much anybody who had a computer who got knocked up in September or October of 1996. And I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. I know many of you were all also back in those early days member of listservs or are now. And it was like, for me, these were all women who I was not likely to come across during my day-to-day life. At that point, my life had kind of constricted to this tiny universe of playgrounds and gymboree classes in West Los Angeles. There was one woman whose husband left her in the second month of her 5th pregnancy, leaving her to raise all 5 of her kids without any financial or emotional assistance. That was pretty amazing. There was a pediatric oncologist who left her practice when she got pregnant with her, and here's what we called them, June bugs. Got pregnant with her June bug and became the first and surely the most overqualified lesbian brownie troop leader in Hercules, California. There was an internet entrepreneur supporting her agoraphobic DH, I assume you all understand the reference, who by the time her June bug was born was neither a D nor an H. And then there was my personal favorite, and the reason I stayed with the group, I'm sure, the polyamorous frequent poster who just kind of never understood why her partner's other partner was not as excited about the pregnancy as she was. So, needless to say, I loved communicating with these total strangers, even as they occasionally drove me nuts. Come on in, sit down. Because they were whining about hemorrhoids and breast tenderness, but I was whining about hemorrhoids and breast tenderness. So it was just this wonderful way to go online and whine about hemorrhoids and breast tenderness with people who cared about my hemorrhoids and my breast tenderness. Everybody else in my life kind of rebelled at this soul-crushing self-absorption. that seem to come over me whenever I'm pregnant or alive. But I was rapt. I was rapt by all of these conversations. And, that period of pregnancy, I don't think I'm unique in feeling like it's this time of your life where you are completely absorbed with navel gazing, for obvious reasons, because your navel is becoming ever more prominent. But, you spend all your time that you're not working considering being pregnant and rubbing cocoa butter all over your belly. So it's nice to be with other people who are doing the same thing. So this was a really sweet and supportive group, right? We took up a collection for that mother of 5. We bought her car seats and strollers and everything she needed to have that baby. Whenever anybody shared bad news, we were always sympathetic. At those early days, we had yet, most of us, to come across an internet troll. I think there were just fewer of them back then. But even in those halcyon early internet days, we got into flame wars. They were over the usual subjects, as anybody who has spent even an hour on mommy websites knows what they're like. Breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, cloth diapers versus disposable, the safety of anal sex during pregnancy. Okay, that was the polyamorous mom. Although I'm willing to bet there were some people who were kind of glad for the sharing of information on that particular subject. I tried very hard not to start flame wars myself, but I do have to admit that I was fairly often the first to launch a spirited defense of any member who I thought was being unjustly attacked. But like I said, this group never degenerated into true hideousness because, and here's the most important part, we were not anonymous. We all used our real names. And I'm sure that it's possible that there was some Julie or Joanne who was really a troll named Philip wearing crusty boxer shorts and a coffee-spattered wife beater, hunched over his laptop in a cockroach-infested studio apartment in Van Nuys, getting off on pretending to be a 28-year-old Mormon woman from Salt Lake expecting her 3rd baby on June 14th. It didn't seem likely. And even if there was such a troll, that Philip did such a good job, of supporting us and talking about his baby that it just didn't really matter whether he was real or not. We believed it and we needed it. And we got what we were looking for. We got reassurance that we were normal. We got someone to listen to us. We were made to feel by one another that we were good enough. We were good. We were all going to be good mothers, right? Then, after that initial glory days of early internet, I expanded my web communities beyond this fairly personal list, and of course, the level of discourse deteriorated. And whatever support I was getting began very swiftly outweighed by the toxicity that seemed designed to destroy my sense of well-being. Websites like Baby and Berkeley Parents Network, who goes to any of those? Let me show of hands. That's it? Oh, people must be so busy. They still give great information. You can buy discount Robies, those little slippers, but they do seem to degenerate all the time, ever-increasing frequency, into full hysterical the battles, the subtext of which is not only that you and I don't agree with each other, but your opinion in its utter and fundamental idiocy makes you the worst mother in the world. And it's in this kind of poisonous sludge in the comment section that we're all seeing the worst in people. I will say that some of these websites seem to have me. This Urban Baby. I've never gone to the discussion board. My husband did after someone called and said, or emailed and said, you guys really need to look at this. He goes into his office, he comes out after an hour, he's like pale and shaking, and he gets me to promise that I will never, ever put my name into the search bar at Urban Baby. So I got my editor to do it, and she also was, she's just, apparently my favorite part of all the horrible things they say is that whenever anybody says anything nice about me or my books, someone always says, according to my editor, "Hello, Ayelet, we know it's you." Like I'm spending all my days on Urban. I mean, there was a time in my life where I probably would have spent more time on Urban Baby, but not so much now. So during 2005 and 2006, I had a column on Salon.com that kind of replaced the Annie Lamont Mommy column. And in that column, I wrote on all sorts of subjects. I wrote on motherhood, yes, but I also wrote on, for example, my own mother's battles with Medicare, the rights of juvenile defendants, how much weight I gain every Christmas season. I tried to be timely, I tried to be honest, and I tried to write with humor about difficult subjects. By the time I published my second column, I had completely stopped looking at the comments section. So many people wrote, and while many responses were sort of vaguely complimentary or even vaguely respectful, the vast majority were laced with this unbelievable venom, this loathing for everything about me, and I just couldn't stand to read them anymore. For somebody who writes with so much narcissistic self-absorption, I am very thin-skinned, and I respond to almost all criticism, at least personal criticism, by falling into a pit of self-loathing where I'm convinced that the person doing the criticizing is absolutely right, and I am as awful as she, and it's almost always she, says. So, but today, I'm going to be reading, in the interests of, full disclosure or whatever, I'm going to be reading a bunch of hate mail, hate comments from Salon, because I thought that might be fun. So here's some of the things I went and searched and people said about me in the comment section. Yet another article that reinforces my impression that Ayelet Waldman is, in layman's terms, a freak. I hope Salon's remittance goes directly into some kind of trust fund to poor kids' future psychotherapy. Here's another one. Please, there are lots of E. Please take her away. She's ruined Michael Chabon for me. I'll never read another of his books ever. I won't be able to. Just thinking of him married to her makes me ill. And another personal favorite. I always need to take a shower after I read Ayelet Waldman's pieces. And I assume that's because he's going to go in the shower and beat off because he's so excited about, maybe not. But, just even reading those now, as I'm doing it as a joke, but it still gives me this kind of in my stomach. And I think, really? Shower? Why? That was not, obviously, my first experience with being loathed on the internet, which is, as you can tell, the subject of today's little talk. I had, as some of you might have read I guess it was probably about 5 years ago now, I published an essay in the New York Times that really kind of brought me. Not a lot of people read Salon, so there were haters on Salon, but when the New York Times, it turns out that more than 5 million people read. And I wrote this essay. I wrote it for a literary anthology, and we're going to do a little experiment now. How many of you have ever read a literary anthology? Okay, so this is an educated crowd. That was like 6 hands. How many of you how many of you read the whole thing? Yeah, 3. Okay? There's my point. What happened was 2 friends of mine were putting together this literary anthology that nobody was going to read. And it was all about motherhood. And they called me and they said, all right, Ayelet, we've got mothers writing about divorce. And we've got mothers writing about having twins. And we've got mothers writing about breast cancer. But we don't have any mother writing about sex. And since you're the only person we know who's having any, you have to write about it. And I decided that I would for this anthology that nobody was going to read. And at first I wrote this kind of Dr. Ruthie, how to maintain an intimate relationship with your husband when you have 4 children piece. But the more I got into it, the more I can always find that sort of corrosive sense of a ribbon of self-loathing in every topic. And I realized that this whole idea of my sex life made me feel horrible, made me feel like an awful mother, made me feel bad about myself. And I wrote about that. So I'll read you just the first couple of sentences of it so you can see what this essay was about, in case you didn't read it. I have 4 children with whom I spend a good part of every day, bathing them, combing their hair, sitting with them while they do their homework, holding them while they weep their tragic tears. But I'm not in love with any of them. I am in love with my husband. If a good mother is one who loves her child more than anyone else in the world, well, I'm not a good mother. I am, in fact, a bad mother. I love my husband more than I love my children. And it went on from there. And on.
I just have to say,
Yeah?
when we were talking about you coming here, someone mentioned that incident, and then that person
Well, it's interesting because that is, I just as an aside, that's really what it's about. He's a really great guy, and moreover, he is an absolute 50% sharer in the domestic life of our family. So after this essay came out in the New York Times, and I did not submit it to the New York Times, they picked it up. I got, thousands of emails. And among the thousands of emails were the emails from men saying, so how do I, make my wife a little more like you because I haven't gotten laid in 3 years? And when I always wrote to these guys, they're looking for me to give them some secret, butterfly position or something that's good. But all I said is, you want to get laid? Here's a trick. Unload the dishwasher, my friend. Push the Swiffer around the floor. There is nothing sexier to a woman with small children than a man folding laundry, right? That's why I'm so crazy about my husband, because I don't cook, I barely clean. He not only, works and has a job, but he also is responsible for more than half of the domestic world. So when that essay came out, I had been toiling in utter obscurity before then. Really, I don't even know how. I think my murder mysteries sold in hardcover about 3,500 copies each, and then a tiny bit more in paper. Really, nobody knew who I was. And that essay landed with this kind of hysterical thud. The first thing I knew about it was a friend of mine called me. So it was in the Sunday Times in the Modern Love column. So a friend of mine called me on Monday morning, and she says, "Don't watch The View." Well, I wasn't planning on it. And just Star Jones is taking off after you. And I thought, Star Jones is criticizing my marriage. Star Jones, whose husband's waving that rainbow flag, but, okay. Phone rings almost immediately later, and it's a friend of mine calling from a Starbucks in Chicago, and she's like, I don't know what you did, but the women at the next table are tearing you to shreds. And one of those things about having one of those names that doesn't belong to so many people is that all of my friends all over the country were hearing people scream about Ayelet, or Ayelet. My favorite story was my agent, who was in the Union Square Cafe in New York City and was talking to her lunchmate about the essay, and someone from across the room screamed out, "I hate that essay, that woman is a complete..." And then there was a fight in the restaurant with people taking sides, and it's a very quiet, sedate place. And my agent was seriously bummed because she couldn't go there for weeks afterwards. But anyway, so and of course the web went insane. Gawker began what has been a 6-year devotion to tearing me to shreds. I don't know what they said there, but they were ridiculing me. And I actually feel like Gawker is every time I feel like nobody reads me, or I'm not successful, or my career has been a failure, at that moment, reliably, Gawker will publish one of my tweets in this, huge screaming bout of Ayelet loathing, and it just reminds me that I'm alive, and that I'm still out there. That at least some neurotic, envious, crazy 22-year-old writer wannabe in New York City knows who I am. Andrew Sullivan, who at the time I wasn't so fond of, but then after the the election, I became very fond of. He also took off after me, and at one point, so there's all this stuff. There's stuff on the web. There's emails, thousands of emails. The New York Times is calling, saying they've never had this much response. They're forwarding me all these awful, and also some great, but lots of awful emails. And at one point, my husband's kind of lying face down in the bed, moaning. Why? Because he had just met Greil Marcus. Do any of you know who Greil Marcus is? He's the best writer about rock and roll in the history of music writing. I would say he's the grandfather, but he's not that old. But he's the first guy who wrote about rock and roll in this really intellectual but also fun way. And my husband idolizes him. And he had just begun to exchange emails with him. And that morning, an email had come in from Greil Marcus that was addressed, "Dear Sex God." So my husband was kind of like, "What have you done to me?" And he sort of rolls over and he says, "God, well, at least I should be grateful you didn't go on Oprah to talk about our sex life." And that afternoon, I was like, "Well, honey, did you mean what you said? Because look who's on the phone." And it was, in fact, the Oprah show. And I did go to be on Oprah. Yes, I did. I have nothing to say in my defense other than I am venal, and I really, really wanted to sell books. And Oprah sells a lot of books. That's why I went. I also went because they told me that Oprah was on my side, and I thought I was going to go on the show, and Oprah and I were going to have this conversation in which we talked about how great my points of view are and how brilliant I am, and then I was going to go off and sell 800,000 books, and that's not quite what happened. What happened was, start at the beginning. On the plane to Chicago, I got this horrible pimple right here. And of course, I was in the bathroom popping it the whole way. But so by the time I got to the set of the Oprah show, I've got this red zit, it precedes me into the room by a good 3 inches. So all I'm thinking about at that moment is the makeup department on the Oprah show going to be able to spackle out the rest of my face so that this zit does not cast a shadow? So I don't really pay attention to what they're saying to me. So I don't hear the producers. And the first thing I really noticed that there's something wrong is that there's this kind of yowling noise, this sort of hysterical shrieking, and I'm in the green room, and it seems to be coming from the vents. And I looked at the producer, and I'm like, what is that? It sounds like the 3 witches over the cauldron passing their eye back and forth. And she said, well, that's what I've been talking to. I decided to alternate form today. We are assembled a group of 24 women. They hate you. You used to be a criminal defense attorney. You're used to hostile juries. You'll be fine. So I go out so they take me out on the stage. By the way, perfect. If you go look on the web, no zit, complete, I don't know what they did, magic. Every time I have a pimple now, I ache for them. They lead me out onto the sound stage, and there's producers all around me. And as I'm getting on the sound stage, they're choosing women from the audience who can sit up on the stage, and one woman flings herself across the seats shrieking, "Let me at her!" And that's what I saw when I got on the stage. It was unbelievable. I mean, these women were so angry. They wanted to, they had been blogging about me for 3 days, and now it was their chance to tear me limb from limb. And I sat there listening to it for a little while, and then I thought, you know what? I don't need this. I didn't go on Jerry Springer. My goal here is to sell books. I don't need to do this. I am out of here. And I'm just about unpinning the mic when this door end of the soundstage opens. And in this kind of halo of golden light walks a being, I swear to God, from another planet. Oprah just is not human. I mean, her head is bigger than a human head. She smells better than a human person. Her skin is lit from within. It glows a kind of golden. Anyway, I was so, my heart just stopped. I was it was if you were an absolute born-again Christian and Jesus walked into your bedroom. That's what it felt like. So she sits down next to me, and she leans over, and in my ear she whispers, "Your husband's book, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, is the best book I've read all year." And what am I thinking at that moment? I am thinking Oprah Book Club. I am thinking 4 children's college education. I am thinking I am set. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to buy a bigger house. It's all. So I am not going anywhere. And the whole time, she would every break, we would be whispering together, and we were sharing little jokes, and the women are totally tearing me to shreds. My favorite woman says, she raises her hand and says that she has 4 kids, but she's a good mother. And the reason that she knows this is that she never has sex with her husband. And on the rare occasions where she allows him to do his business, and that is a direct quotation, she watches TV. Yeah. Okay, so you and we hear that, and we're just what? Oprah hears that, and this is why she's actually better than all of us, is she, without missing a beat, says, "What do you watch?" To which the woman replies, "Jeopardy." Which from now on, every time you watch the show and you think about buying a vowel, it's going to completely change the way. Trust me, you'll never see it the same way again. All right, so, but, Oprah did agree with me, right? And she was on my side. And having Oprah on your side means that all the women in the room, by the end of the show, it was like a cruise ship, sailing along, and it just kind of turns around in water, and it takes about 45 minutes, but at the end of the turn, they're all like, oh, we love Ayelet. We totally agree with her. She's the best friend we ever had. And just, I think this whole talk is an aside, but just as another aside, so I get off the stage and I call my husband, and I'm like, oh my God, Oprah and I connected in this amazing way. I mean, like, you know how you meet someone and you just know you're going to be friends? I mean, we had that kind of soul connection, that bond. And, dude, you're going to have to learn how to play golf because you're going to be golfing with Stedman while Oprah and I are hanging, doing girl things. And he's like, uh-huh, mm-hmm. So I go home and I write her this letter like, Oprah, you and me and the bond and the connection and the soulmates and the instant and the blah, 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 so blah. And I get a letter back, and I swear to God, it is mimeographed on that purple, I swear to you. And it's off-center, and it says, Dear guest, thank you for sharing your story. I know. I know, it's so sad. And I really thought, but then, just to show you that I'm not a complete moron, I called up a friend whose book was an Oprah Book Club pick, and I was like, Isabel, Oprah Winfrey? And she said, your best friend for 48 minutes. And it's true, and I know it was real. I know that I wasn't the only one in the room, because I think she felt it. I know she felt it, but only for 48 minutes. And then I even met her after, and this was really the soul-crushing thing, because I thought, at least I'm memorable, right, if I'm not her best friend. But I met her after during the Obama campaign, and I'm like, oh, Ayelet Waldman. And she's like, okay. And clearly no recollection at all. Anyway, where was I? Talking about hate mail? Okay, so, right, I'm talking about how I was no neophyte to insult, that I, have been insulted frequently. I live in Berkeley, people. I know what it's like to be the butt of other people's insults. But there is something really special about the comment section of the mommy blogs. There is something unique about that vitriol. I think it's like there's this moment in history. How shall I describe that? It's as if when the stars align in this way to create the perfect medium for something. So the analogy I like to use is dogs and cars. So dogs, we have been training canines, 10,000 years, I don't know how many tens of thousands of years. We've been creating these, they took wolves and we made them into dog companions and this whole thing, right? And we did this for whatever reason, for hunting, for companionship. But it turned out, a little over 100 years ago, when the first automobile was created, that the actual thing dogs were meant to do, the thing that expressed their soul most perfectly, was to stick their head out of an open window on the highway and have their tongue waving in the breeze. Every dog, that's what a dog was meant to do. That's the perfect expression of dogdom. And who would have known until we invented the automobile? And that is what I feel like the internet is for maternal self-loathing. I think it probably always existed. There was always this kind of, you're a horrible mother, I'm a horrible mother, we eat our hearts out. But when the internet was created, it was this perfect, paradigmatic, exquisite universe of bad mother vitriol, the perfect place for it. So, and I want to be really clear. I am not a Luddite. I'm not one of those people who believes that she's allergic to Wi-Fi. Do you know that there are, in fact, people who believe that Wi-Fi gives them migraines? I don't believe that. I love the internet. I'm going to read you a little list of recent Google. This is 1 day's worth of Google searches, 1 24-hour period for you all. This is what I looked up. The maximum speed of a classic single-hulled wooden schooner, current presidential polling, Colorado, Florida, Ohio, and Minnesota. This was during the election. How incomplete grades are awarded at Harvard College. Who on my street gave the maximum donations to which presidential candidate. The hours of low tide in Blue Hill, Maine on July 4th of last year. The square footage of the average boxing ring. The hours of operation of the Two Birds Cafe in San Geronimo. What percentage of Americans are idiotic enough to believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim? The cost of custom-designed vans, the winner of last year's National Book Award, the cost of a set of sails for the above-referenced schooner, which of Paganini's caprices is more challenging to play, number 5 or number 24, the names of string quartets, the starting time of the movie The Hulk, the relative merits of local Ethiopian restaurants, Golden Glove rules regarding the composition of boxing gloves, the average weight of 5-year-old American boys, and the correlation of emaciation with delayed cognitive development. One of my kids doesn't eat. The efficacy of Cetaphil as a remedy for lice infestation, whether frequent lice reinfestation has ever been used as a justifiable defense in a case of assault, the cost of a flight between Oakland, California and New York City, the cost of a flight between New York City and Bangor, Maine, nutritional information on agave nectar, and the average number of puppies in a litter of dachshunds. And I don't know if that's complete. That was 24 hours of my Google history. And to further prove that I'm not a Luddite, I was an early Gmail and Google Calendars adopter. Maybe not as early as you people, but I was. I tweet, yes I do. I Facebook, and I have been involved in a myriad of listservs and online communities. One for owners of Bernese Mountain Dogs, another for devotees of raw dog food. Yes, be quiet, I know it's stupid. Myriad lists about the 2008 presidential elections, one for treatment and care of children with ADHD, up-to-the-minute information, photographs of women's high-heeled shoes, one devoted to the side effects of psychotropic medication, one on writing, one on skincare, one on the proper treatment of plantar fasciitis, and I will say that they all get ugly, all of them. Even the raw food one, definitely. They all get ugly, but the vitriol is worst of all when the topic is motherhood. And I don't know why that is. I mean, other than that it's this perfect manifestation of everything we most hate, this kind of nexus, conjunction of maternal anxiety, misogyny, guilt, leisure, technology, I don't know what it is, but it is a vile place at times. There's even a study. This is not just me complaining about how people hate me on the internet. The University of Maryland published a study in 2006 that showed that women are 25 times more likely to be the target of malicious online attacks than men. This is true. So it's not just that the web brings out the worst in us, it brings out the most misogyny and the most self-loathing. And like I said, you know, maybe it's true that women have always been nasty to one another on occasion, but maybe now, you know, you used to once have to know somebody to be bitchy about her, or at least to know someone who knew her, and now you can be bitchy about anybody, anywhere, who's involved in any literary community. But at the same time, I think I'm almost afraid to say this. If I have any goal in the 30 seconds I have left before I devote myself to parent-teacher conference, that's where I'm actually going after this, to question and answer, God, I just want to call for like a ceasefire, if possible, or at least a raising of consciousness that we are doing this to ourselves and each other, and that we're doing this especially around the topic of motherhood. And I'm never going to give up on the web. I mean, and particularly on those listservs. When Abe was born, my youngest has this jaw defect that meant he couldn't breastfeed. And I joined this listserv called Pump Moms. They're not called listservs anymore, Google group, called Pump Moms. And I got more information from those women than I got from every lactation consultant. Yeah, excellent. I paid people $100 an hour and got nothing. And those Pump Moms saw me through 6 months of pumping. So I'm not saying we need to stop, you know, joining in these motherhood online communities. I am just begging, and I know what's going to happen is Gawker will see this little video and they'll be like, oh, Ayelet Waldman, just like Rodney King. Why can't we all just get along? But really, why can't we all just get along? So with that, I'm just going to open for comments. If you're my mother, you can criticize me. If you're not my mother, you can criticize me too. Questions?
Since in the ensuing time, is the vitriol, is it less frequent? Or?
Against me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah, weirdly, yes. Well, yes and no. I mean, Google did put Michael and me on, named us third most loathsome literary couple, or Gawker, not Google, Gawker, named us third most loathsome literary couple, which I actually was kind of pissed off about, because why? Why are we only third? What did Jonathan Safran Foer and Nicole Cross do to be more loathsome than me? I don't think anything. But, so it still rears its head, but mostly I think there actually has been a little bit of a shift in how we think about motherhood in the time between when I wrote that essay and when the book Bad Mother came out. Because what I saw a lot of when Bad Mother, which is just kind of, the book Bad Mother is really, in a way, I have a kind of perversity. And there's this Yiddish word called afsalochas, which means, like, just to spite you, really. So afsalochas, everyone gave me grief for this essay. Afsalochas, I'm going to write a whole book on what a bad mother I am. See what happens then. But actually, it's been much more positive. And I do think it's because this good mother paradigm, the kind of, the aggressive imposition of the perfect mother image on women there's been a little bit of a backlash against it. And I like to think if I've done anything in my literary career, it's contribute to that backlash. So that now I have noticed that the woman showing up at the bake sale with the perfect cupcakes, she's the one embarrassed now. So, which I think is all good. Can I ask you a question? How come so many people at Google wear Google-labeled attire? It's free. Excellent. I don't notice any Google attire in my swag bag, but I don't know. Fleece vest. Anybody else?
So I was not a mother when your article came out, so I did not read it.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know the controversy. Of course, I'm going to go look it up when I get back. But what were people so upset about? What was you read that intro, and so...
Why did they get so angry?
What were they so angry about?
It's so interesting. I think I had a conversation with a friend of mine who writes for the magazine section of the New York Times named Lisa Belkin, and she wrote a piece, probably almost a decade ago now, maybe 6-7 years ago, it was a cover magazine piece about privileged, mostly white women going back to work, leaving work and going back home, leaving all these successful women, leaving their exciting jobs and becoming stay-at-home mothers. And it was I don't know if any of you remember that piece. And she got so much grief for that. I mean, hate mail, and so much so that there was this one ridiculous instance where her mother, who was the dean of a college, was sitting in the college cafeteria, and these two women were raging about how Lisa, and they said, well, she's just jealous because she's just a stay-at-home mom. And her mother, because she's her mother, couldn't resist saying, excuse me, my daughter writes for the New York Times Magazine, in case she actually writes cover pieces. They don't usually just let you do that if you're a stay-at-home mom in your pajamas. Yeah, that's actually career people, you idiots. But anyway, when I was talking to Lisa, I asked her why she thought her piece got people so angry and why this piece got people so angry. And she said that she thought she had this experience that anytime you write about women of our generation, women in their 30s, 40s, now into their 50s, it's like you're writing a Rorschach blot. What you say is nowhere near as important as what they are experiencing. They read their lives and a criticism of their lives. Everyone is so knotted up with this sense of that they're screwing up somehow that they read anything as an indictment. And I think, they're probably, so what am I writing? I'm writing hey, I'm getting laid, you're not getting laid, and why is that? I mean, that's already offensive, just because I'm not getting laid doesn't mean I'm not better than, So I think there was a little bit of that, but I think fundamentally, anytime you talk about parenting, we as readers tend to look on those words as somehow personal attacks. It's not just how somebody else lives her life, it's an indictment of the way we live our lives, and we're so anxious and neurotic about that in particular that it causes this kind of eruption. That's the only thing I can think of. Otherwise, who cares, really? You read something by someone you disagree with, you're like, oh, what an idiot, and move on. I actually had a woman come to me at a book signing a year after the essay had come out, and she said, my husband made me come to, and this was a book signing where you had to buy the book for $25 and have lunch. Like, you had to be in my presence for an hour, and you had to pay $25. That's not nothing, right? And she said, my husband made me come today because he says, I won't stop talking about you, and I've been so obsessed with you and so angry that he just felt like I needed to finally confront you. And I'm just like, get over it. You know, God, okay, hate me, whatever, but really, is it really so important? But I do think it has that element of, of just writing this Rorschach blot. They were just reading something, they were reading something other than what I had written, or what I had written had triggered something in them. Yes, anybody? The man, both men. We shall call on them. Oh, 3 men. Yes, sir.
I'm actually going to ask sort of a man-related. Your husband writes essays about men and fatherhood. Does he get any of the same kind of...
Oh, no, he is God incarnate. Michael writes it as, it's the same thing as like when he is a father, right? My favorite story is he's standing online in a cafe. He's got the baby and a baby Bjorn, and he's just getting coffee. That's all he's doing. He's not paying attention to that baby. He's getting coffee, right? Getting coffee. He might even spill the coffee on the baby. Who knows? And some woman taps him on the shoulder. She's like, "Oh, you are such a good dad." And I'm like, really, what would you have to do as a mother to have someone in the street tell you you are such a good mom? And I know what it is, okay? You have to perform an emergency tracheotomy with your Bic pen on one kid while breastfeeding another and helping the third with their homework. Then you get the good mom thing. Other than that, nothing. So his essays, and yes, he's a better writer than I am. Maybe that has something to do with it. But people are just like, oh, he's so wonderful. He's such a great dad. And nobody ever gives him grief for revealing stuff about our children, even though he does. And it's just so unfair.
Yeah, you mentioned, you called out earlier one of the reasons you thought the original listserv was a little more civil was people who were under their real name.
Yeah.
Hopefully the real name. Did you recall that because you had other stories who were in more anonymous circumstances? They hate mail.
Yeah, those are...
Times must be...
The New York Times, the New York Times letters were primarily positive. They were overwhelmingly positive, really. The stuff that actually went to the New York Times, where you have to sign your name, was mostly fan mail. It's the stuff that came to me that could be anonymous that was so loathsome, and the stuff that went on the comment section. So I do think anonymity has a huge amount to do with it. I mean, look, to come up to someone's face and say, "My name is Ayelet Waldman, and I think you're fat and ugly," is really different from like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're in your pajamas and, "My name is Bad Mama, and I think you're fat and ugly." It's just a lot easier to do that. So I think anonymity plays a large part in it. But I do think there has been this, disastrous thing that's happened to civility. I mean, there are some people who say awful things on the web who are awful people. I'm sure that's true. But there are a lot of people who say awful things on the web who are not awful people, and there's just something about that environment, that stew, that toxic sludge that is contagious. I mean, I know that I have participated, like I said, in flame battles, and then I found myself saying, "What are you doing? Did you really?" And then I have to go and apologize. Like once I won't even tell you. But, so I do think there's something particular about the web, and anonymity plays a large part in that makes it so much easier to be your worst self. Anybody else? Yes.
So I'm just curious about were you, with the essay and the problem with that?
Mm-hmm.
Was it that you didn't love your kids enough?
Well, no, it was
Your husband too much?
that bothered people in particular.
Yeah, I mean, what was something that bugged them?
Well, I mean, I think there's one line that was particularly problematic. I had just finished writing this book called Love and Other Impossible Pursuits, the one that's going to be a movie starring Natalie. It is a movie starring Natalie Portman, out sometime before the end of the year in your local theater. It will probably be there for a minute and a half, so go that weekend. It's a fabulous movie. Yeah, that too. But that's a good movie. Do both. It's a great movie. What was I saying? Oh, so the one sentence. So I had just finished this book, and that's a book about a woman whose baby dies of SIDS. And I had been immersed for a year in this world of maternal grief. What does it feel like when your baby dies? And what I wrote in that essay was that while I could imagine, I could run a movie. I always run these movies in my head sort of the worst case scenario movies and all these terrible things that happen. You know, every time my kid goes for a bike ride, I'm like, and the child molester down the bike. And I could run these movies of their deaths. And while I could run that movie in my head and see the other end, I have no capacity to imagine what my life would even be like without my husband. Like, I can see having a life, God forbid, is what I wrote, but I can't see that without, if my husband had died. And I think that that felt to people like I was saying, I would throw my kids in front of a bus to save my husband's life, which I obviously wasn't saying. And also, there's this great quote by Nietzsche. You didn't think I was going to quote Nietzsche, did you? But I am. It requires a shattering exaggeration for the world to hear even half the truth. And I think that's part of what I was doing in that essay. Like, you know, I was responding to this thing that I saw, and so my response was, do I really love my husband more than my kids? You know, how do you compare that? I don't want to sleep with my children. I don't want to have sex with my children or sleep with them, frankly, but, you know, and I do want to have sex and sleep with my husband. So it's like very different kinds of love, and you can't compare them. So really, that's sort of the truth. But what I was responding to is a world of hierarchies, and that's why I spoke in the language of hierarchies. And that's what I think made people so angry. Let's take one more question, and then let's let you people go back to work. Someone be the last question after I've said this.
I really agree with the Rorschach comment about how people hear, and I feel like no matter how carefully I couch things, the other mother is, we don't watch TV in our household. The reason we don't watch TV is because my youngest, before she could read, could identify words like Lexus, BMW, and Porsche. This child is just, she sees brands and she consumes them. We watch movies, we do computers. We're not such purists, but we don't watch movies. And this other mother was going to have them all over. My kids younger, they were going to all be watching TV. It's TV for 13-year-olds. My kid is 6. And I'm like, well, you know, and I say, you know, here's Claire, she's got this little problem, so we don't like do a whole lot of TV with her. Well, she sent me an email saying that they watched The Simpsons last night. It was a special episode about Jerusalem, and they had a really important family conversation about it. She can't wait till her youngest is old enough to watch The Simpsons, so they can all share that together. And in fact, she thinks The Simpsons, I quote, is a national treasure. And I was like,
I mean, I think The Simpsons is a national treasure too, but do I feel like there's anything wrong with you? I mean, but that's just it. Like, what she heard was not, my daughter is such a nut job that we can't watch TV, otherwise she's going to be like insisting that she get Captain Crunch for breakfast. What she heard was, what's wrong with you that you let your children watch TV? And that's what we always hear, right? We don't ever hear, this is how I do things. We hear, you're doing it wrong. And it's just crazy. It's crazy. I don't know how to make it stop, because I do the same thing. I swear, my kids only watch TV on the weekends, but they're allowed to watch whatever they want. I feel so guilty about that. I bet I would have been like, The Simpsons is a national treasure. Or I would have felt it in my heart. But because I've written this whole book urging people to put brakes on their internal, you know, not to say bad things only about themselves in public, then I would never have said it. But it's like that thing, you know, I mean, it's it's all about her own anxiety. It has nothing to do with you and your kid. So thank you all for coming. Thank you. I have to give a special shout out to the men in the audience, just because, oh my God, how brave and wonderful. Or else just how lazy and you really didn't, or you wanted to know how to get laid and you thought this would be the perfect opportunity. I have other tips. They're mostly home cleaning related. So come and see me after. Thanks, guys.